Hello.
Oh,
It's kicked me out, but I think I'm back in again.
you are. Do you want to pop it on mute and go to a meeting?
Hi everyone, it's Steve at Sourcebreaker. Thanks very much for joining on. We're just going to wait a few more minutes. So normal start time is about 5 past, just to let everyone have the opportunity to get on. So thanks for joining us. I'm going to go quiet now, and we'll see you guys at 2:05. Cheers. Hi everybody, thanks very much for joining on. Can I just check that people can hear me speaking? Just a couple of little yeses, fabulous. Okay, cool. So I'm just going to pop into the chat. If anyone can't hear me, check your speakers. Looks like people can hear, which is great. So we've got Nicole Plinston joining us any minute now. Nicole will hopefully be in a second sharing her screen, but if not, we should be able to hear her. Right, here we are. Excellent. Nicole is here. So just to give it a bit of an intro, guys. So Nicole runs This Is Prime. As I say, is a co-founder of This Is Prime. I know Prime very, very well. They're an agency that supplies to Sourcebreaker, and they supply to some of the best grads that we've actually ever worked with. All of our grads go on Nicole's training, and they are very, very high performing and absolutely love it. So I can speak firsthand about the quality of Nicole's training and the results and the impact it's had on the Sourcebreaker business. So what I'm going to do, guys, is share with you some links to Nicole's LinkedIn profile. And hold on, if I'm doing that right. I don't even know if I'm doing that right. Let's see if we can get that out there. So there's a link to Nicole's profile and then also to the Prime company page on LinkedIn. So feel free to connect with Nicole, get following their company page. They cover rec to rec and also sales into technology. And typically operate at the graduate type level. So anybody who's going to be looking for entry level type staff, I cannot recommend Nicole and Prime more highly. And just while we're posting links, I'm going to put mine in there as well, and also the Sourcebreaker page as well. So feel free to connect with myself, connect with Nicole. Happy to connect with everybody. Okay, so without further ado, I'll crack on and let Nicole get started with the presentation. What we'll do is, as previously, for anyone who's not been on, we'll typically take questions at the end. So let us know if you have any questions. And what we'll also do is a couple of polls throughout the presentation, just to see what you guys are thinking. So the first one for this one, sorry, Nicole, just before we start off.
Honestly.
So say that again, Nicole.
Using my screen because I can't see you.
Okay, I can see your screen, yes. I can see security and privacy.
It's
Popping
not
up.
letting me there, I don't know why.
Are you using a Mac or a Windows machine?
Mac.
A Mac. If you flick 3 fingers up on your trackpad,
Mm-hmm.
and then does it pop up with a go to meeting screen?
Let's have a look. Yeah. It's just jumping back and forth at the moment.
And are you jumping it, or is it?
Let's have a look.
Okay. Cool. So we can see your screen, Nicole.
Okay, that's the main thing.
Yeah. I don't know if you've got the opportunity to. There's a little button that shows putting on the camera. Don't worry too much if not. It'd be lovely to see you, but if we can't, we can definitely hear you and we can see your presentation. So we'll be able to crack on without any issues.
Sure. Shall we just go for it and hope for the best?
Yeah, let's go for it. As I say, we can see. I think we can see your screen. So if you do share your presentation, or sorry, to go to slideshow and then crack on, we can see absolutely fine. So just before we get started, what I'm going to do, Nicole, is I'm going to pop a poll up onto the screen for everybody. So this is asking about market conditions, guys. Are you starting to see market conditions significantly improve, stay about the same, decline, or significantly decline? So this is based over the last few weeks. So what we're asking here is, are you starting to see a bit of a recovery, or are things still apocalyptic? Okay, right, we've got 30% voted, so we'll give it a few more seconds, get a few more votes out of people. The poll should have popped up. If it hasn't popped up, just pop your answer into the chat bit, and we'll be able to see your answer in there. Okay, right, so we've got most people voted now. So excellent news. Let's close the poll. So can everybody see the results? Just popping them up now. Everyone see the results there? So there's a lucky 3% that's seeing a significant improvement in market conditions. 58% also fortunate seeing an improvement. 28% still seeing about the same. And there's an unlucky 10% who are still seeing a bit more of a decline in their market across this period. But good to see, what's that, nearly 80%, 90% of people, actually, yeah, 90% of people things aren't getting any worse, which is good to hear. Okay, thanks very much for that, guys. Right, I will now hand over to Nicole, and we can get started with the training session.
Okay, apologies, I don't know why, but my screen won't show, so I'm going blind and hoping for the best. So thanks very much for the intro, Steve, and also thanks for the invite, allowing me to come along to this session today. Massive shout out to everyone else that's done the previous webinars over the last 4 weeks. They've been absolutely amazing. And thanks to everyone who's tuning in today to complete the series. As Steve mentioned, I co-own an award-winning rec-to-rec sales recruitment and sales training company called This Is Prime, and we're based out of both Manchester and London. So as part of my remit within the business, I do still actively operate as a billing manager and know exactly what happens on the front line and the kind of challenges that recruiters are faced with every day. So I'll be bringing real experiences, past and present, and most importantly, some tried and tested methods to the table today. Now, this webinar is focusing on closing and the final stage of the recruitment process. So we'll be taking a look at what can go wrong at this stage and, more importantly, why. There will be a lot of synergy with previous webinars, as closing top candidates doesn't just happen at the end of the process. It does require quite a strategic approach throughout that's planned well and executed even better. So I'm just going to run through the session objectives so you know where we're heading. Let's hope this works. Did that move? Yeah, fingers crossed. So my view, I suppose, is that the golden rule in any recruitment process is to always be closing. And the fact is we can test a candidate's commitment and a client's commitment throughout so many stages of the process. For some reason, though, we often forget to do so, which in turn sees us losing control of the process or struggling then to close the deal, and even worse, damaging the relationship with the client, the candidate, or both. So today we're going to take a look at how and where in the process we should be trial closing to ensure we reduce and ideally remove the things that are most likely to stop us from ensuring we get the deal. So we'll also be looking at how we actually present offers to candidates and the importance of selling them the offer, not just telling them. We'll then be moving into that dreaded counter offer territory, which is likely to be even more relevant now in the current climate, and run through some top tips on how to stop them from happening. And then finally, we're going to take a quick look at that minefield we can find ourselves in from acceptance to start date and everything then through rebate, so that we can protect the deal as we go through. And then after that, I think myself and Steve will be doing a quick Q&A, so feel free to pop in any questions you have for the chat, and I'm sure Steve will be more than happy to do some work. We sat back the last few weeks watching everyone else. So let's take a look at where and when in the recruitment process closing needs to happen. So it's an absolute fact that trial closing saves deals and makes deals. So much time gets wasted in recruitment working on non-committed jobs or with non-committed candidates. And as much as we probably hate to admit it, the blame here more often than not does actually sit with us, because sometimes our desperation to get the deal can often lead to us cutting corners in the process. And now more than ever, this is definitely not an option if we want to be making deals happen. I'm sure there's many of us right now, me included, who are operating in an industry sector where there are less jobs and more candidates available. So we've got to be giving ourselves the best chance of filling the jobs that we do have, and trial closing will 100% let us do that. So trial closes are low risk and high value. So what that basically means is they differ from closing, as they are more focused on asking for an opinion or confirming understanding, whereas a close is asking for a decision. So they are a measurement that tests the level of commitment at any point. You get to measure where the candidate and client are at any given stage of the process, which is honestly the best diagnostic tool you can ever have as a recruiter. But for some reason, we just don't use it enough. So in recruitment, I think we're all aware that knowledge is power. So knowledge is gaining that information from the candidate, the client, and the market you operate within. And then this information gives us control. So the more information we can have at the outset, the more control that we can have. So if you have the right information at the right time through trial closing, you can absolutely avoid any nasty surprises occurring at the end. So I'm just going to quickly highlight the key trigger points in the process where you must be trial closing. Now, they will no doubt seem obvious, but I can promise you they do get forgotten. The time to begin working on closing both a candidate and a client is not when you're at offer stage, it's when you first meet them or speak to them. So if we cast our minds back a few weeks to when Trevor did a really great piece on job qualification, you'll have noticed how much questioning is centered around creating and qualifying the need, because without the needs, you can't sell the solution. In my opinion, the job qualification call is the most important client conversation you're going to have in the process. So maximise it, because this is the first stage of the process where you must start trial closing to qualify both the client's commitment and their urgency to hire. And then in Jeremy's webinar on candidate qualification, he highlighted the importance of qualifying the candidate's level of motivation and desire to leave their current employer, as well as their hierarchy of requirements. So this is trial closing territory for testing commitment, developing control, and even more importantly, counter offer prevention, which we're going to come on to a bit later on. So candidates' hierarchy of requirements is what you should be using to underpin every conversation you have with them from this point onwards. I honestly cannot emphasize enough how important this information is to your closing. I use it all the time because their hierarchy of requirements, so what they really want and need, are literally the most powerful tool you can have when it comes to closing. So make sure you've got them and you're using them all the way through. Okay, so I said at the start of this webinar that the golden rule is to always be closing. There is actually another golden rule, and that's to always be selling as well. Interestingly, this is actually the part of the process where recruiters often fall down the most. They will call a candidate and say, great news, I've got the perfect role for you. Let me tell you all about it. And then they dive headfirst into pitching the role. Now, obviously that might work for some, but for me, I just think that's a massive opportunity miss, because before selling the role to them, you should always first revisit what the candidate has told us they want and their hierarchy requirements. This is normal sales methodology, because it not only allows you to retest commitment and check nothing's changed since you last spoke, but more importantly, it gets them back into the right mindset so that they can then see how great the role you have is without any resistance. And likewise, we need to be taking the same approach when calling a client to tell them about the candidate. So before diving straight in, remember the sales process, revisit the must-haves that the client told us about the job qualification stage, reconfirm that nothing has changed, and then pitch your candidate to the client specifically on these areas. So a good example of a trial close here with a client would be a question like, Mr. or Mrs. Client, if the candidate really impresses you tomorrow, which I'm confident they will, how quickly would you be able to get them back in for a second interview? Or how quickly could you move to offer stage? Hypothetical questions are brilliant for trial closing, and we should be using them throughout the process. Then our next opportunity to trial close is when we get to this stage of the process, which is interview stage. Now, you should have picked up some great techniques last week from Baron, and he would have talked about how to prepare the client and candidate for interview as well as take feedback. This is a really, really powerful part of the process, especially when it's done right, and can literally make or break your chance of getting the deal. So when you're prepping your candidates, use the opportunity to retest their level of engagement and how committed they are, and also remind them why this particular opportunity aligns so well to their hierarchy requirements. And then when you're taking interview feedback, well, this is trial close heaven. Find out from the candidate how well they feel the role and company matches what you're looking for, and from the client, how well they think the candidate matches what they're looking for. Because there are so many questions at trial closes at this stage that we can use. Things like, could you see yourself working there? If you're invited back for a second stage interview, what would your thoughts be at this stage? All of these questions keep you in control of the process and on track to achieve the end goal. So we covered a lot of that in the previous webinars, and now we're sort of looking at, we're getting to that offer close stage. Unless the candidate has been lying to you, you should have a fair idea by this stage as to whether they're going to accept an offer if the client makes it. And similarly, you should have a good idea as to whether the client is actually likely to offer the candidate. So at this stage, there are a couple of different approaches. I appreciate we all work in different industry sectors, and they'll be likely to be influenced by the speed at which your clients move to offer and how many stages you have in your interview process. But my advice is, if it's quick, then you're more likely to combine that feedback at final stage with your pre-offer closing. If it's going to be longer, so it's a few days before you're going to get a decision, then do that trial closing at the end of the feedback session, but then recall them a couple of days later or the next day and really test how they're feeling now they've had a bit of time to think about it, because you want to keep that candidate hot and wanting the role. So I'm going to run through some example questions for this particular stage of the process when we go through counteroffer prevention a little bit later. Before we do though, as you can see from the process, with every point of contact, we should be building to a close. A deal is made long before a candidate formally accepts that offer and signs that contract. So control the controllables all the way through the process. Don't ever leave closing to the end, because when you do, bad things happen. So in an ideal world, we would present offers to candidates. Candidates would happily accept. The client would be happy. The candidate would be happy. Our boss would be happy. We'd be happy, and we'd all live happily after. But this is recruitment. And if we haven't delivered on all of these stages of the process, and we haven't done the trial closing throughout, then what can happen, and often does happen at this stage of the process, is one of the following. So this is where we get that sickening feeling. It's kicking in because you've got an offer from the client and the candidate isn't biting your hand off to accept it. Now, the fact is, many of these barriers could have potentially been removed, or at very least minimised, way before now. But instead, we've either missed out parts of the process or not developed a good enough relationship with the candidate, and now find ourselves on the back foot, like fighting to save that deal. So we're going to run a really quick poll here. I'm just interested to know which of these responses is most frequently heard. So Steve, you're right to run that quickly?
Absolutely, yeah.
So weird talking to you, not being able to see you.
Yeah, no. People have just signed on to be wondering why there's a woman's voice and a man sitting there with no mouth moving. Right, okay, so let's get the poll lodged. Okay, so what objection do you hear most? Better offer elsewhere, salary below expectations, change in personal circumstances, client didn't sell the opportunity well enough, or counter offer? Okay, well, I'll give it a few more seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, right, we're closing the poll. Get your answer in quickly. All right, done. Okay, right, let's share the results. So, what objection do you hear most? So, better offer elsewhere, 25%. Salary below expectations, 28%. Change in personal circumstances, 15%. Client didn't sell the opportunity well enough, 9%. And counter offer, 23%. So top was salary below expectations. Next was a better offer elsewhere. And third was counter offer.
Wow, and counter offer. Okay, so all of those things are probably things that if we look back through the process, we could potentially manage way before offer stage. Salary below expectations is slightly worrying one, I guess, because the candidate would have been put forward at a certain expectation, I would assume, from the outset. So I suppose there's a lot of questions around that. If the client has a reason for not meeting the salary expectations, what are they? We need to find out what they are. And then obviously, if there's no movement on that, we need to put salary aside and look at all the other hierarchy requirements that the candidate has mentioned, such as progression, development, flexible working, location, all the other things that were important outside of salary, and focus on those things first. And then find out why that salary is so important, and does it really outweigh everything else. So yeah, that's probably one that we should be able to manage earlier on, but we need to understand why the client feels that they should be offering a lower salary, and then manage it on hierarchy more than anything else. We'll talk about the counter offer one a little bit later on as well. Okay, we also find ourselves in this situation quite a lot, and I think the reason is nobody's perfect, and I'm sure we're all guilty of letting things slip through the process at some point. My advice, I guess, would be, if you do, and this does happen, rather than try and find reasons to blame the candidate, the client, whoever else, the competitor, just take a step back before moving on and look at where in the process it might have gone wrong. What could we have potentially have missed that if we got it right, that wouldn't have come up at the final stage? And of course, it's not just clients that we find this situation happen with either. So candidates, our clients can often throw a spanner in the works too. So we may find ourselves reaching the end of the process and the client drops in one of these lovely surprises. Again, you've got to look back over the stages of the process and think to yourself, where did it potentially go wrong, or what could I have done differently? Because you'll be surprised at what we can find further back. It is fair to say a lot of things can go wrong, but it doesn't have to. If we make trial closing a non-negotiable part of our recruitment process, many of these things can actually be proactively managed, prevented, and best case scenario eliminated way before the close. So working on the basis that we nailed the process and trial closing, we're now in a position then to present the offer to the candidate. So the number one rule when it comes to offers is to never deliver them without having done a pre-offer closing part of the process first, which is generally after the interview. Because it's at that stage of the process when you will have qualified what the offer would need to be for a candidate to accept. So that's the salary, the bonuses, holiday allowance, etc. But you should have also already preempted any potential barriers by asking the candidate what could prevent them from accepting an offer. So for a candidate to accept a job offer, they need to know it will be worth it, especially if they are currently employed and are successful in their current role or their company. So there are three things we must always include when presenting and selling the offer to the candidate. The first is we need to ensure the offer we're presenting reinforces all the candidates' reasons for wanting to leave their current position. So we must be able to clearly demonstrate all the benefits of this opportunity and how that negates the frustrations and negatives the candidate had about their current role or company. Second, and most important, is their hierarchy of requirements. We must clearly communicate how this offer and opportunity fulfills all of their hierarchy. So this is the most critical part of the offer stage, as it's the candidate's hierarchy that will have underpinned the entire process, and it's what will ultimately now influence their decision to accept. So offers generally get declined when a candidate's hierarchy hasn't been fulfilled. So we need to make sure we absolutely nail this part when delivering the offer. So match every part of the offer to their hierarchy. And third, one that often gets missed, is create a sense of achievement. So when you are delivering the offer, you need to do it in a way where the candidate feels that they've achieved something and they've worked hard to get it. It's human nature that if something seems too easy, it can quickly become less desirable. So in this sort of scenario, a good technique here would to be used something like, look, Joe, you were actually up against two other really strong candidates at this final stage process. Both of those candidates also did have a couple of years more experience than you, but the client said that they were so impressed with you throughout, and particularly with the way you then delivered that presentation, and they could see you fitting in really well with the team. So people like to feel special. If a candidate knows they're up against some tough competition and that the client chose them over the other candidates for X, Y, Z reasons, then it's immediately more attractive to them. So if we deliver on those three things, their reasons for leaving, their hierarchy requirements, and that sense of achievement, we're much more likely to get them to accept the offer. But it's never that straightforward. And one of the worst things that can happen in recruitment is counter offers. And they can occur at any point from the candidate resigning right through to the planned start date with your client. So 1 minute you're thinking you filled the job and everything's going smoothly, and then out of nowhere you get a call from your candidate saying they've decided to stay where they are. They've been offered a promotion or a pay rise and they've decided to accept it. So why do counter offers happen? Well, there are loads of reasons, but I think the most common and obvious one is that cost of replacing them is really high. And if they're a good candidate, then they're going to be even harder for their employer to replace, which means the employer is then going to have to fight even harder to keep them. So they will then pull out all the stops and use all the tactics that are guaranteed to create doubt in the candidate's mind around whether leaving is actually the right decision. So the fact is, we as recruiters can't stop counter offers from happening, but we can and must acknowledge the fact that they're highly likely to happen and put a process into place from the outset that minimises the risk of candidates accepting them when they do. So there is a really simple 3-stage process to a counter-offer management that's easy to implement and easy to remember. It's called RIO: registration, interview, offer. These are the 3 stages where we should always be doing counter-offer prevention. As mentioned, the trial closing slide earlier is where counter-offer prevention starts. So it's at registration and qualification stage. So for many candidates, leaving their current role in employer can be a massive decision. The earlier we address that and alleviate any potential concerns they have about it, the better. So we should only really be wanting to work with candidates that are really committed to making the move. So make sure they are before you go any further, and have some key questions embedded into your registration process that you always ask. So the most obvious one is finding out why they want to leave. And if it is just money or promotion, then I've got to be honest, that's probably not enough. You're going to have to probe further to find out why they can't get those things where they are currently, and have they even tried. If they haven't, then that should be an immediate red flag for you, as if that's what's important to them, and then when resigning they do get offered it, the chances are they're going to stay. So be confident that their motivations and drivers to move go way beyond just salary or promotion. And also ask them at this stage of the process, I know it's early on, but ask them how their employers usually respond to resignations. So do they just let them go? Do they get them to stay? Because this will help you manage the resignation process when they get to offer and acceptance stage. So I'm sure it goes without saying, but I'm going to say it anyway. Log every bit of information you obtain around their reasons for wanting to leave and their hierarchy of requirements. Then the second stage of the counter-offer process is at that interview stage, and this can be done in both your prep and feedback calls with the candidate. So during interview prep, reconfirm with them that nothing has changed since you last spoke to them. No change to their current company, no changes to what they're looking for, no other job opportunities lurking in the background they didn't mention, because all of that really helps you. But it also at this stage, gauge their level of enthusiasm for the interview. Are they raring to go, or are they having doubts? You need to know that now, because this is your chance to remind them why this opportunity fulfills their hierarchy. And you can also revisit the negatives that they've expressed about their current role and company and highlight how this opportunity negates those, so that their subconscious is then re-alerted and their reasons for wanting to leave are now reignited. If you're prepping for a second or final interview, then find out what specifically they want to get from this stage of the process, and then help them prepare the right questions to ask at the interview. So you may also want to share this insight with your client so that they know what it will take to close the candidate too. And then feedback calls after the interviews, they are your biggest player in the counter-offer process, because there are so many trial close questions you can be asking at this stage to maintain control over the process and stay ahead of the game. So these are just a few examples you would ask initially, but if it's final stage, then your questions will need to transition into the pre-offer closing territory. So this is where you'll be identifying if there's anything else they need to be able to make a decision, and what could potentially stop them from accepting if offered. Really key that we cover those things off at this stage of the process, because we're about to move into offer territory. So by the time we finish pre-offer closing, we should be pretty confident that if offered, that candidate will definitely accept. And then the third and final stage of the RIO process is the offer stage. And there are a number of things we must do here to firstly ensure the offer is accepted, and secondly, that the candidate doesn't accept a counter offer when they resign. So rule number 1, wherever possible, you deliver the offer, not the client. So unless the market sector you operate in is sales or negotiation related, there is a strong chance that your candidate isn't going to be an expert negotiator, and therefore may not feel comfortable with the prospect of having to do their own negotiation should the client not offer what it is that they want. So they may end up accepting an offer that they didn't actually feel was good enough, but didn't know how else to handle it. And the risk here is that they then come back to you and retract their acceptance, and it's very difficult to then recover the deal as the candidate is feeling undervalued and uncomfortable about the situation. So it's our responsibility as the recruiter to negotiate on the candidate's behalf and ensure the offer they get is the one they'll confidently accept. So always be making the offer to the candidate, not the client. And never stop testing the candidate's commitment. So a good way to finish an offer call that's been accepted is to always say something like, look, just one last thing, Joe, before you go. The client, as I mentioned, actually interviewed 2 other really strong candidates alongside you for this position. Are you happy for me to let the client now know that they can tell those 2 candidates that the position's been filled? If we get anything other than a confident yes at this point, then it's not a done deal and we need to manage it accordingly. And then also get them to close down all their other interviews. So make sure the candidate knows how to actually close down any other opportunities they've got on the go, especially if they're not exclusive with you. Never assume they'll do it. Explain that it's important that they make the other parties aware of their decisions straight away and withdraw themselves from the process. Now, my personal preference has always been to encourage candidates to send a short, polite email explaining that they have accepted a position that they really want, so wanted to let them know and thank them for their time and the opportunity. But if you or your candidate's preference is to do it by phone, then obviously just make sure you give them some really good guidance on how to handle any likely pushback that they're going to get. And then follow up with them the next day to confirm that they've pushed back and they've closed all the opportunities down. And if there are any issues, pushback engagement, we want to know about it now rather than later. So we can then start discussing possible start dates. Notice periods are like navigating through a minefield, as we all know. And all the time that that candidate is still with their current employer, there is a counter offer risk. So we need to encourage the candidate to see whether they can offset any holiday entitlement against their notice periods, because we want to shorten that as much as possible and get them out of there as quickly as we can. And then finally, we need to help the candidate prepare for resignation preparation. So this is where we should be talking through with them the 3 possible outcomes when someone resigns. So 1, do they let them go straight away? 2, do they accept their resignation and keep them through their notice period? Or 3, do they not actually accept their resignation initially and ask them to take some time to reconsider, which is basically the employer buying themselves some time to put together an attractive offer that they think will encourage them to stay. So ask the candidate which of those 3 outcomes you think is most likely and how they feel about that. And then we can chat through the resignation process with them, really encouraging them to do it as soon as possible. Also, I don't know about other people's preference, but mine is to encourage them to resign at the end of the day, not the morning. This is really just so that the employer has less time to turn things around that day. It's also likely that the candidate then will leave and call their mates or their partner or their family and tell them that they've done it, and then that really further enforces their decision in their minds, and they're now excited about the prospect of leaving. And also discuss how they think their employer will react and how they're going to respond to that reaction. So talk again through their reasons for leaving and why not to accept a counter offer. So there are a list of different reasons you can give to a candidate why not to accept a counter offer. I always recommend just selecting a couple that are most relevant to the candidate's situation and then using them to concrete the fact that they're 100% making the right decision. One definitely worth using is the fact that over 2/3 of people who accept a counteroffer then leave within the following 6 months. So it's a really powerful stat to hit home that accepting a counteroffer really isn't a good idea. And then finally, help them with a resignation letter if they need it. Just tell them that you've got a template they can utilise to make things easier for them, and you'll email it over to them that day, because you want to make resigning as easy for them as possible. Okay, so the candidate has accepted and they've gone into work to resign. Our job, unfortunately, is nowhere near done. A deal is never truly a deal, in my opinion, until they've passed probation. So we've still got a lot of work to do. Firstly, just make sure the candidate knows to call you after they've resigned. So you want to know how it went, what was said, how they felt about it then, and how they're feeling about it now. You also need to find out what their employer did, if anything, to try and get them to stay. This is absolutely key, as if they've tried once, there's a chance that they're going to keep trying through that notice period, and we need to ensure that we have a solid plan in place to minimise any risk of that candidate being swayed. And then confirm when their last day will be and check that they have utilised any outstanding holiday to shorten that notice period. It is also at this stage worth asking them what their employers actually said about replacing them, as this could become a good BD opportunity for you moving forwards too. And then finally, we're on that home straight, but don't get complacent. The management of this process from the point forwards from here is absolutely key to making sure your hard work doesn't now go to waste. So regular contact is obviously really important, but not just for you, but for the client as well. You need to have check-in calls planned and ensure all the paperwork's been done, and then just manage them through their notice period to make sure there's no further pressure being put on them to reconsider. But you also need to try and arrange some form of contact between your candidate and their manager and team just during that notice period, so that the candidate maintains that excitement about joining, but also still continues to feel valued. And then make sure you contact them a few days before their start date so that you can answer any questions they might have and confirm that they're all set. So from this point, we can't let it become an out of sight, out of mind scenario. We need to schedule those reminders, touch base with them and the client regularly, because if there are any issues along the way, not knowing about them means we can't resolve them, and then we're more likely to risk losing the deal and even worse, the relationship. Because good candidates do know other good candidates, obviously, and they're often well networked. So let's look after them, and then they'll never hesitate to recommend you or do introductions for you further down the line. Now, all of these things seem so obvious, and they are so obvious, but we're busy people, right? And it's so easy to forget things or miss things unintentionally. So rather than learn the hard way and lose a deal and commission and possibly even a client or candidate, put a plan into place that follows the process that we've gone through today and protects both your revenue and, more importantly, your reputation. So just to summarise the key takeaways, a few things to highlight. We've covered quite a lot in a short space of time. Trial closing makes deals and saves deals. So closing needs to be happening throughout. Make sure those questions are embedded through the entire process, starting at the qualification stage, and underpin everything with hierarchy of requirements. It's really, really key. And then sell the offer, don't tell them. Create a real sense of achievement and make them feel that they've had to work really hard for it. And finally, use Rio. Don't ever forget that counter offers will come up at the end, and the better the candidate you've got, the higher chance there is of a counter offer. So always be using Rio. And as my final point, a deal is only a deal when it's past probation. I know people focus on rebate, but for me, to prove that you've done a great job, a candidate needs to pass probation because they're happy and the client's happy, and that's a really good partnership. So that's it. I'm apologising again, I can't see my screen, so I don't know if you have been able to follow that as well as I'd have liked. But I'm just going to hand it back to Steve now, if you're still there, Steve.
Yeah, I'm still here, Nicole.
Fabulous.
Yeah, thanks. I think everyone's been able to follow really clearly. That's a great presentation. I think one of the big things for me, what you've got in big, bold letters there, I was definitely guilty of, is a deal's only a deal when it's actually past probation. For me, pretty much when the acceptance happened, I was like, sweet, that's done, and then move on to the next thing. And I think, yeah, there'll be plenty of deals that I'd have had and other people have had where they could have kept hold of those deals if they'd stayed on top of the process all the way through till, yeah, at least rebate and probation time, rather than candidate accepts, everything's done, you send off your invoice and off you go. Cool, that was really helpful. So guys, we'll open up to questions now. So feel free to fire away. Yeah, so first bit of feedback is great job without being able to see the screen, Nicole. So top freestyle in there. So guys, yeah. Everyone's had to put up with looking at me as well while you've been talking. So yeah, let's if everyone go to the question tab and just jump on and fire away with questions. So first question is from Jackie. Do you feel candidates are keeping cards closer to their chest now? Often find other opportunities come their way out of nowhere, despite sense checking along the way.
I think that, yeah, that can happen a lot. You have to really work on developing the relationship with the candidate. And I think the more work you do at that very first stage, the more chance you've got of maintaining the control through the process. So the time investment should always be in that qualification registration, because that's where you're going to build trust, that's where you're going to develop it. But the most important thing is really working on those hierarchy and being able to match to them. so that you can then demonstrate that you've really understood their reasons for leaving, their reasons for wanting something else, what they truly are, and then you can develop your conversations around them. That's where you're going to build more trust, and then they should be more honest with you. But explain to them why it's so important they're honest, because what you don't want to do is get them through a process, they get an offer and they love the opportunity of you, and then they go, oh, but I've got another final elsewhere. And then you've got to manage that with the client. It doesn't look as they're committed as enough as we thought they were in the first place.
Yeah, I think that's a great shout. Next question from Michael. How many conversations do you have to cover the hierarchy of requirements and recap reason for leaving, as this could turn into one chunky and intense call?
Yeah, I think it's important at most stages, especially the hierarchy. The time investment is so important at the beginning, and then it's matching, isn't it? If you're selling anything, your sales process starts with uncovering what somebody wants and needs, and then pitching the solution. But what we always do is summarize those needs and wants before we start pitching. So it's just revisiting them. So you're not going to dwell on every single element, but you're just going to match. So you're going to be saying, look, the reason why this is a great opportunity for you is because you mentioned X, Y, and Z, and it ticks all those boxes. But in addition to that, it also has this and this as well. I would say at least 3 times, especially with the counteroffer process.
Mm-hmm. Good stuff. And I think that leads on quite nicely to the next question from Sarah, which is, how do you propose to log the appropriate steps throughout? So she's saying, would you diarise through Outlook or your CRM system? So I think that's suggesting having preset calls set in place with the candidate through the process that are diarised. What's your process on that, Nicole?
Yeah, I think I'll have to be careful I answer this, because if I don't say CRM, I'll get shot down by loads of directors on the CRM system. You should definitely, whichever one works best for you. Like, I'm not precious. I want everything logged, but ultimately don't log it in a way that they're not going to notice it. So if you naturally use your Outlook to remind you of everything, then it's more sensible to do that. But always update your comments from that conversation on your CRM system, because you're busy. You've got a lot of people to speak to every day. You're not going to remember every conversation and what was said. You always need to make that transition from call to call to show that you've listened and demonstrate you take on board everything they said. And you can't do that if you don't have it logged. But I personally use my Outlook calendar for everything, so I've got a terrible memory.
Yeah, I think that's the same with me. I was telling the guys at Sourcebreaker just live by their diary, just have everything in there, because if I don't have it in my diary, I will forget everything. Okay, cool. So Joshua was saying the main obstacle he gets when closing is, I need to think about it. So how do you get around this and close them there and then?
Yeah, I think it's fair, isn't it? Some people are thinkers. They don't like to just jump at the first thing. And it may not be that there's anything wrong with the offer or anything like that. They just don't like to be pressured into situations. That's why if you follow the process, it's so important to trial close at that interview stage. So test their commitment before the interview. And then at the end of the interview, obviously test their commitment there, trial close them using those questions, hypothetical questions. Obviously, you're not putting them under any pressure. So you have a good gauge of if they were offered, they wanted to accept, but also put a bit of a time restriction. Look, the client's really excited. They felt you were the best candidate for the opportunity. However, they do have a couple of candidates in the process. So they would need a decision from you quite quickly, because they don't want to miss out on other candidates, but you're their #1 choice. So how about you have a think about it this evening and come back to me tomorrow, and we can chat through any questions that you've got in the meantime.
Yeah, great chat. I think it's just digging into getting out of them what it is they need to think about. With all the stuff you're talking about, Nicole, with pre-closing all the way through, you've hopefully ticked off most of the boxes of understanding what the offer needs to look like in order for the candidate to accept it. So it's then also, I suppose, thinking about what is it that they're thinking about that's different to, you know, to what you've almost pre-closed with them. So what is in the offer that is different to what they've kind of said that they would already look to accept, and understanding what they're thinking about. But yeah, like you said, there's plenty of people who just, even if everything is right, they still just want to think, and they don't want to jump to a decision, do they?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so Sophie is next with, what would be your approach to a candidate that doesn't want to open up about their reasons for moving on?
It's very difficult to help a candidate if you don't know what it is they want. So I would obviously try and find out why that's such a sensitive issue. And I think initially, again, you're just going to have to start on working that relationship and building that trust. People probably won't give you information initially because they don't know you well enough to trust you with that information. So it's going to be more a case of trying to find out what they want in their new role that they can't currently get in their existing role, what they're looking for at a new company that they can't get where they are. And then as you start to develop that knowledge, if any red flags start to occur, then you're going to have to dig a little bit deeper. You have to make a call sometimes and work with your gut, because you do not want to be investing loads of time into candidates that aren't committed. At the end of the day, especially now, if you've got a job, you're going to want to work that job to the best of your ability to fill it, because there's less jobs about. You don't want to be working them with candidates that just aren't committed to you. So it's a two-way thing. For you to be able to give them the best opportunities to find the best role for them, you need to have as much information from them as possible to allow that to happen.
Fantastic. I think that's a good shout. Okay, Neil Clough is asking how best to present an offer below the salary expectation.
So if the candidate has received an offer, or we've received an offer for the candidate that is below their expectations, obviously we should have managed the salary expectations from the outset. But if the client's reasons are valid, then we need to work with that. But I think we'd need to find out, first of all, why it's coming lower, and manage the client first. If the client's got really good reasons as to why that salary is lower, I would definitely, with the candidate, put aside the salary and look at everything else first. So I would really focus on their hierarchy of requirements. So what did they like about the opportunity, how it ticks all their boxes, why it's such a great opportunity for them, the progression it's going to offer, and always look at how quickly they can progress and increase their salary moving forward. So I would never make the offer about salary, because if it is, you're always going to be fighting a difficult battle if it doesn't come out at their expectations. But also find out why salary is so important, to get a real understanding from them as well, and look at what their reasons were for leaving their current role outside of salary. So use all the other bits of information aside of salary. And if you feel that actually it's justified and the salary should be higher, we should be managing our client on that basis.
Yeah, great chat. I think something I would look to do to add onto that as well is look at third-party information that can support that. So if it really is a case of the salary is lower than what the candidate is hoping for and what you might have pre-closed on, if they're going, let's say they're on 50k at the moment, they wanted 60 and they've been offered 55, for instance, is find some supporting data that says that, you know, the average salary increase in the UK is 3% or 5% or something like that. So it's finding some additional evidence to demonstrate that actually, as much as it might not have met their expectations of 60k, it's way over and above what would be a reasonable salary increase, and actually it still represents a really good increase. It's just different to what they'd have hoped for, and it's taking it out of your hands and you saying it's a great salary. It's actually look at the third-party information to show that this is a good increase.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Good stuff. Scott is asking, how regularly would you check in with your candidate once they've been placed and started the new role? So every week, every month, how often?
Obviously, I would normally do first day, first week. So keen to make sure the first day went well, weren't any nasty surprises on the way, and then end of first week, see how they're getting on. Then I'd make it really clear that channels are always open, but I would alternate for that first month. So I'd speak to the client one week, candidate the next, client next week, candidate next, and then reduce it for that second month to maybe a couple of times that month. Depends on your relationship with the candidate as well, though, because if you've got a really good relationship and they will come to you if there's any concerns, that's great. But also you don't want to be hounding them all the time, because they've now started their new role, and the last thing they want is the recruiter constantly peppering them with calls. So get the balance right, but also set that expectation and explain to them why you're going to check in. So I want to make sure that it's exactly what you wanted, everything we've discussed, any issues, you know, we can discuss them. So set it from the outset so it's no surprise when you do call them that they should be expecting your call.
Good stuff. Okay, so James is saying they've got a candidate treated very poorly by their current employers. Current employers made a counteroffer and promised to be much nicer people. That sounds believable. They've also offered to fast track her career. Do you have any advice on how to persuade her that staying with them is not the right option?
Yeah, I would probably take them a further step back and ask them why they joined that company in the first place, all the things that they were promised, and then look at how they've not been delivered on. And on the basis, because everyone joins a company for a reason, right, don't they? So it's probably because they've been sold the dream or they've been promised certain things and then that hasn't been delivered on. So it could be a scenario where they have been made these promises, but then you have to say, well, those were promised you when you first joined. You've now been there X amount of months or years and they're still not delivered on. And it's taken you threatening to leave that has now turned them around and saying that that actually they can see your value, when it's more that you're threatening to quit, but you're not threatening because you want to quit, and they're going, oh right, I've got to quickly now find a way of telling you you're worth something, which I didn't really demonstrate prior to now. So I think it's explained to the candidate. I would always go back to why they joined the company and why they're looking to leave, and it's normally because things that they were told they'd be delivered on weren't delivered on, and now they're promising they're going to deliver on them again, but they never did in the first place. So what's going to change now? And then remind them that there's nothing worse than staying. Those things don't happen, but also your loyalty has been questioned at the same time, so you won't have the same relationship with them.
Yeah, definitely. I think, yeah, that's a situation that person definitely needs to be moving on. That's not one of those counter offers where yeah, it's worth considering. Okay, right. So Michael is asking, just Nicole, just generally from your perspective, how are you finding the market? Is it improving or declining? So since COVID times, are you starting to see a bit of a pickup now?
Thank God you can't see my camera. This is one question. Thank God you can't see my face right now. Yeah, I'd love to say, yeah, it's booming. I think it depends on the sector you're in. Generally, I think some sectors are picking up quicker than others, as you would imagine. I think people are just cautious at this stage. We're in a situation where no one really knows what the next steps look like, and we're all treading carefully. I think some conversations you'll have, people say it's going to boom, others are saying not sure it will. I would say I've seen more movement in the last couple of weeks than I had seen in previous months, and I definitely think that will continue. I think people are starting to realise that we can't stop forever, and we are going to eventually be coming to the end of the furlough period, and people are starting to already return to work. And once people are back in work, things become a little bit more normal. You're just going to have to work a hell of a lot harder. But yeah, I definitely think we're starting to see some signs of improvement. Not in all areas, obviously, but in some.
Yeah, I'd echo that as well. We're starting to see a definite pickup in the number of jobs, number of opportunities that are out there that people are able to work on. So some positivity, definitely entering back into the market. Michael's saying, how often do you call your clients during these times?
It's a tough one. Again, I suppose it comes down to your relationship and what was said in that first conversation. It's less about just ringing them all the time. I think a lot of it comes down to what value you can add to your client outside of just ringing them and asking what's going on. So sharing insight, sharing information, but always making sure they know you're there if you need anything. So like we've done things where we've been able to add certain value in certain different ways. We've tried to just come up with new ways of being able to contribute value to our clients, which doesn't involve placing candidates with them. But I would say, obviously, not out of sight, out of mind. That's never a good plan. But also, they're under the same levels of pressure probably that you are. And do you want to be constantly called by someone all the time? Probably not. But the odd call followed up by an email, a bit of confirmation, a bit of information. I think that's really, really key right now to maintain those relationships.
Yeah, definitely. I think the thing about adding value on the calls is so important. We always encourage our guys to, when they're calling to customers, have something of interest and relevance to that customer rather than sort of a check and call, hi, how are things, which people will just kick down the road because it's not a critical thing for them. If you can be providing useful information to them on trends in the market, what you're seeing, that's going to mean they're much more responsive to a conversation with you, because it's not that you're calling up trying to sell candidates. You're actually adding value to their role by helping them understand what's happening in the industry that they work in.
Yeah.
Philip is asking, a candidate is honestly telling you from the middle of the interview process that they have another role they're interviewing for, and that other role is a preferred opportunity. However, they aren't sure if they'll get the other opportunity. So basically, you're in second place. How do you manage that?
So your role's second place to another role that they're interviewing at currently. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so I think I'd find out again why. So you need to take a step back before you can move forwards. Everything that we do in objection handling is asking questions first, so acknowledging the situation, then questioning, and then presenting a solution. So it's the same with these sort of scenarios. Find out everything you can about that opportunity and why they feel that one's better. It could just be that we haven't made them aware of something that this opportunity offers that is what they're looking for, but we haven't perhaps highlighted it enough. So I would definitely look at both opportunities and then really discover why they felt the opportunity you had was good. And I always say to people, never make a decision until you've seen all processes through, because you might find out things further down the line that actually are more enticing than what you first thought, but you haven't given it the chance. So never step out of a process until you've completed it. And then obviously I would let the client know that if they're interested and they really like the candidate, these are the things that they need to focus on. So go back to the hierarchy. If progression is really important, maybe they didn't position that well enough in the first stage interview, it's just as much important to the client to sell the opportunity as to you. So I definitely find out what's missing and then obviously advise them to see that process through and allow the client the opportunity to resell the areas that are most important to them in that final interview.
Great chat. That's something we've definitely had experience of with candidates. So yeah, 100%. Okay, Maria is asking, how can you keep buy-in during long delays to avoid temptation of counter-offer or other opportunities?
Yeah, I think that comes down to the control at the start of your counter-offer process. When it comes to that resignation stage, we need to make sure all other opportunities shut down. We revisit why this is the greatest opportunity for them. So at that point, they're so bought in and they know it's the right role. If there is then a long waiting period, obviously it is a bit of a minefield and it's not one we want to be in. We always try and look for the earliest possible start date, because the sooner we can get them started, the better. But I found with my clients, some of the best things that they've done is shared information that person can be researching or looking into prior to joining, getting them involved in any events that they have going on. I know you've done that, Steve, with our guys when it was the Christmas period and they weren't due to start to January. It's getting them in the office to meet the team, spend some time with them, even though they're not starting for a while. I think it's really important that engagement piece, because as I said, when they first get offered, they're excited, they feel valued, they feel special. And then the longer time goes on, they don't hear anything, that excitement starts to dip, they don't feel quite as valued. So maintaining elements of contact through that, not just you though, because it's not you that they want to join, it's the client. So it's really important that the client's the one that's getting them involved, keeping them engaged. But I've got a client at the moment that sent some candidates some information to do some work and research the market before they join, because they can't join for another month. Keeping them engaged that way works really well.
Yeah, spot on. Trevor's asking one which I think is really common. How do you go about letting the client know about the importance of making the offer, so in a timely way and making a good offer? One of the challenges I found is that the client takes some time to come back. I think that's something that is a problem for huge numbers of recruiters, is the client not taking seriously the importance of getting a good offer out to a quality candidate. Yeah,
I think we could embed that earlier on in the process. Again, I think it all comes back to those conversations throughout. So from when Trevor actually did that at his job qualification stage, it was identifying how important it is to fill this position, but equally what's the impact of not having that role filled, and when do they need that person started by. So revisiting those reasons, and then through the process obviously saying, look, this is like one of the best candidates in the market right now, I don't want you to miss out to them to a competitor. So if we get to offer stage, which I'm confident we will, how quickly can we get that offer confirmed and set the expectations so that we don't get to the end and then they're dragging their feet there. It's so important that we manage that earlier on in the process.
Good stuff. Okay, so next question is from Claudia. How would you approach a candidate who jumps jobs regularly but always has good reasons why? And how do you prevent it from happening again?
Yeah, do you know what, that's a hard one, because I think people have a perception if someone's got a number of jobs and they're clearly a job hopper, and that's not always the case. They might just be really ambitious and they've maybe made wrong decisions, or they've always had that as their plan to join more businesses, to pick up the pace on their progression. I'd find out why. Obviously, if they've got really good reasons as to why, then obviously those are the ways you position it. This is where it comes back to never sending the candidate CV and selling the candidate. You know the candidate better than anyone, and the whole purpose of having a really good qualification stage with a candidate is to find out everything that isn't on their CV, so you can sell the candidate for who they are and what they're all about, and not what's just written on a piece of paper. So I guess my view would be really establish the great things about this candidate, why they're a great candidate, and if you're saying that they've got good reasons for moving, then those are the ones that you're going to use when you really pitch that candidate into the client.
Good stuff. Okay, next up is Barry. Barry is asking, what tips or techniques would you have on managing a client who wants to deliver an offer direct without telling you the numbers?
Ooh.
So
I think, go on, Steve. Yeah, no, go on.
I've got a thought or two on that. One would be giving a couple of examples to the customer on why that's a really bad idea. I'm a strong believer in just always telling stories throughout and giving examples. Just to explain to the client, look, we've done that twice before or 3 times before, whatever the number it is. And you can always use colleagues' experiences as well if you haven't had those experiences specifically yourself. So we've done that on 3 occasions, and 3 times the offer hasn't been accepted as a result, specifically the client doing it direct, and then give the reasons why. So some of the ones that Nicole alluded to earlier in the presentation as to why it's a bad idea for having the client do it directly, just basically point to like previous experience tells us this is a really, really bad idea. And if they still then persist, I'd say, okay, well, let me have a chat to the candidate, because in a lot of cases, candidates aren't comfortable with having that direct conversation. That's why we act as the intermediary. And then speak to the candidate and basically position it in a way that you're basically not saying to them, say no to the client about letting them deliver the offer, but putting it in a way that the candidate tells you that they're not comfortable in having the client deliver the offer direct.
Yeah, definitely. And I think you've also got to think, if you've got a candidate that's in the process with 2 of your clients, how's your other client going to feel if you're letting one client speak to the candidate and pitch the offer to them and not the other, and then it becomes a pitch fest, and that's not what you want. The purpose of us being utilised as that service provider is to be able to consult across both parties and reach the best solution for both. And I'd be honest, I think there's a number of candidates that I've worked with in the past that would hate to have to negotiate their own offer, and I know confidently that I would be able to do a better job for them, and they probably would as well. So it's that control piece of the candidate has an expectation that you manage that process for them.
Excellent. Okay, Chris is asking, how would you sell the benefits of an external candidate against an internal candidate?
Obviously, it comes back again to the job qualification piece. So we're going back to the beginning, finding out what's most important about this hire, what they really want, and what the impact is of those skills and experience into that role. And then I would always say that it's great, like, to see candidates that are the best caliber. So you're representing the best candidates, and internal application is always great because people want to progress people within their industry and their companies. It's key, but you need to ensure that you still get the best person for the job. So you need to be able to benchmark talent outside of your own company and organization as well as in it. So I would always encourage them to still see your candidate alongside the other candidate, and you'll be confident that your candidate will impress. So you have to put your best candidate forward. At the end of the day, you're a specialist in finding the people in your market sector that are the best. So you're always going to be confident that that candidate goes in as the skills and experience that match the requirement of that role, whereas the internal person may not have done that job before.
Excellent. Okay, Daisy's next. How would you manage a candidate who doesn't want to disclose their salary on the first call?
If they don't want to disclose their own salary, but they want to give you an expectation of what they're looking for, you should have a pretty good idea of whether they're benchmarking themselves well or they're pricing themselves out of the market. Knowing what they're on now versus what they're expecting, I guess, doesn't matter so much on the first call. Ideally, you want to know, but it's more about their expectation of what they want. And if you've done a really good reg with them and you know that they're pricing themselves out of the market, now's the time to manage that expectation and see how serious they are about moving. But as I said earlier, don't make everything about salary. Salary is one of the danger zones where if it's just about salary, counter-offered battles are going to be huge. You need to find out all the other reasons, because people don't move just for salary. Salary is a part of it, but most people will remove for a number of different reasons, and salary will just be one of them. So I wouldn't make it the biggest thing, but if they're saying their expectation for a new role is quite high and it's way off where you would say, I'd just be honest about that.
Excellent stuff. Okay, up next, so Joe is asking, could you give an example of where you've used HOR to save or close a deal? Yeah.
A lot. I think it's so important that your hierarchy underpins everything. I think especially in our industry sector, we utilize it for absolutely everything that we do. So if we've got a candidate that is in a scenario where maybe they've got another offer on the table, or they're not really sure if they want to accept, and we know that we're going to lose the deal potentially, then we would revisit the hierarchy requirements. So we would revisit what the role was. And I always think if you take a candidate back to the very beginning of the journey, they relive that journey again. So you're saying, like, when we first met, this is what we were saying we were looking for. This is why this opportunity was perfect for you. The key things that were really important to you were this, this, and this. So we said that we'll only put you forward to opportunities that ticked all those boxes. So have those things changed? And if they haven't, then this obviously is going to be the right opportunity. But hierarchy is probably the one thing that will underpin everything, because we've had candidates before where they've gone for an interview elsewhere. They've been offered a much higher salary. They've been closed pretty much on the spot, and then they've come back to us and they've been sold the dream. And they're like, oh, look, I need to cancel that other interview that I've got with you at final stage because I've just been offered this, salary's better, the opportunity's better, I get to travel globally and all these wonderful things. And they're going to fast track me through a process to get me offered. And then you're kind of like, well, okay, that's great, but let's go back a bit, because up until that interview, you were 100% set on this being the right opportunity. So what has changed? And then put in a time frame saying, right, rather than just cut yourself off the other opportunity, which you haven't seen through to the end, until this point, it was a really good role for you. So my advice would be, let's see if we can get you back in this afternoon to see the client. Let's revisit why it was such a good opportunity. And then I'd get on the phone to the client, get that interview booked in earlier, and also prep the client that if they really like the candidate, this is what they need to really sell the opportunity on. We've been in scenarios before where that's happened a lot, especially in our market sector, but then it comes back to the long term and focusing on, that's great now, but you said you're looking for this role offers it. Don't cut yourself off from that role until you've seen through the process. And then the clients are normally very good at selling their company. The client can sell their company better than a consultant can.
Absolutely. Okay, so Claudia is asking, what would be your approach to a candidate who didn't accept an offer but after a couple of weeks approaches you again?
What, for the same offer, for a different role?
So I think about, the same role that they'd originally not accepted with the company, and then actually decide after a couple of weeks, do you know what, I do want this role now.
I'd first find out why they didn't accept. Like, did they accept something else, or did they think they were going to get something else and then didn't get it? Because no one likes feeling that second best, do they? Interestingly, we've had this come up with the COVID situation where people have perhaps declined offers and taken other offers, and then those offers have now fallen through because of furlough and all sorts of other things, and then they've come back and they've gone, right, can I go back to the other one? And it's a really difficult one, because if you've said no to someone, I mean, I personally, if someone's turned me down for somebody else and then wants to come back, I'm kind of like, don't think so, because you didn't buy into enough in the first place. But if they had turned it down because they were being swayed by their current employer, or they weren't 100% sure, and they go away and then come back a couple of weeks and go, do you know what, I've done a lot more research into it, and on reflection I actually think it's the best move for me, then I wouldn't hesitate probably in having that conversation. But I really want to know what's changed their mind before I pick up that phone to the client.
Okay, excellent. Next one is Ollie is asking, sent over a candidate at whatever salary, send them over, let's just stick with 50k. Now halfway through the process, the candidate's decided they want more in order to move than was originally specified. How would you manage that?
Do you want to take this one, Steve, or shall I go?
Okay, yeah, I'll go for that. So I think one of the things with this would be looking at, again, like looking at market data. And if you've had the qualification conversation with the client and the client's salary, and you've had that conversation, you said to the client say, right, we're looking to pay 50k, but the market rate is 55k. Every time I'm having a conversation with a customer and a job qualification, I'd want to be giving that client an idea of what the average market salary is on that conversation. One thing is it positions you very much as a partner with the customer. When they're talking to you about salary, and you're able to provide market data on what the averages are. If the client is paying under what the market rate is, then that gives you a good point of reference to go back to and explain when there's a change in what the candidate is looking for, to explain that the candidate's obviously been in other processes with other companies. They're offering 5k, 10k, whatever the number is. They're offering more. So as much as as much as they're originally looking for 50k, they've now had 6-7 other opportunities put in front of them where the salary opportunity, the salary in front of them is 55 to 60k. The candidate's not entirely money driven, like they're not coming and seeing you guys purely for salary. But if you put yourself in the candidate's position, if you were having opportunities put in front of you and you're looking at one opportunity at 50k, and there's other companies putting a similar opportunity in front of them at 60k, it's understandable that candidates are really going to want to achieve what their market value is. So it's not a money, agreed thing. It's just, being in line with what the rest of the market is offering. And it comes back to our conversation earlier when we were talking about what the market rates are. In order to secure the best candidates, you're going to, it's worth being flexible on the salary. If the client's just got no room for maneuver whatsoever, then when you're having that conversation with the candidate, again, it's how Nicole's spoken before about really digging into the other key requirements of the candidate, not just purely focusing on the salary side of things, but what are the other things about that role that make it particularly attractive. And again, it comes back to the qualification, why the qualification is so critical. It's not just taking a list of requirements about what the candidate's going to be doing in the job, what the start date is. The key things I'd always be asking are, what is it that sets this job apart from others? Like, why do people stay in this job? Why do people love working here aside from the money? And just having that list of things that you can use to sell back to the candidate that makes it not purely about money. If you're way off money-wise, it's going to be a tough conversation. But if you've got those other selling points to keep the candidate interested, I'd be reiterating those. But yeah, I think again, just comes back to taking the job qualification of the client, getting the key stuff out of them, educating the client as to what is a fair rate on the salary, and just understanding, whether the candidate is being greedy or whether actually they were previously over at below what would be a reasonable market rate, and now they're looking for market rate. That might have been a bit of a waffly answer. Hopefully that was helpful.
That complete sense to me.
Yeah, good stuff. Okay, cool. Right. So last one. Oh no, yeah, literally last one. So Mika is asking here, when you've got your candidates in your process and they try and drop out and accept another offer, but then you're encouraging them to see through your process. But then when your candidate gets an offer, you're kind of asking them to end all other interviews. So how do you manage that? That's obviously, that's sales. You're going to want to encourage your candidates to take your offer, to close your deal and make sure you don't miss out on the deal. But how do you manage that with a candidate when you've said to them it's important to see a process through, and then at the back end of it, you're then telling them to end their other processes?
Yeah, I suppose if all their processes are through you, which is your ideal scenario because you've got them exclusive, then you should always encourage them to see out the process with all. I guess it depends how confident you are. Obviously, you're a salesperson, though, you're in it for a reason, but ultimately you need to be 100% confident that that role and opportunity that you have is exactly what they're looking for. So they're really bought in, you've trial closed them, they've said if it was offered at a certain level they would accept, then you know that you're not trying to push them into something that they don't want because you've already trial closed them on that basis. So you were saying to them, like, if the opportunity's there, and if they're saying, well, I really want the opportunity, I'm really delighted that I've got the offer, but I've got a couple of other interviews I want to see out, then obviously I would just highlight the fact that there is a risk that you can lose an opportunity if you wait too long. Because if you want to see out all the other offers or opportunities through your other channels, that's fine, but these clients need this role filled, as we mentioned at the start. This is what they're looking for. They think you'd be perfect for the role, but they would need a decision sooner rather than later, and try and sort of give them some time to think, revisit all the reasons. Something we often do is do a summary email as well to candidates, just reselling the benefits of the opportunity, why it ticks all their boxes, why it meets all their hierarchy, and why the feedback that they gave to us after the interview and how they felt, and why they thought it was the best job for them. And then that gives them some time to think overnight, and then hopefully by the next day they'll come back and go, yeah, no, I know that's the right opportunity for me.
Fabulous. Okay, right, last question. So would you say it's true as a candidate you shouldn't discuss salary during the interview?
So I think candidates are always advised not to discuss salary at interview, for the two reasons. One, they might say something too high, and the other reason they might say something too low, and you don't want to then be picking up the pieces. I think I always say don't, because it's a subject that we obviously want to get them the right salary, but also you know that they know you've put them forward at a certain salary as well. So if it comes up, I would never suggest a candidate sets a complete number. I would maybe say, look, if they bring it up, just sort of give them, I've got an idea of the range of salary that I'm looking at. It sits within this remit, but I wouldn't get them to say a specific number. And if the client's pushing on it, just say, look, that's something that I've obviously spoken to my consultant about, and I'm sure they'll pick that up with you.
Fabulous. Right, that's all of our questions done. So thanks everybody very much indeed for joining on. Hope it's useful. The webinar will be sent out to everybody after this in your email. If you wanted to have a look at some of the other ones, a couple of people just put comments on there saying they wanted to see some of the other webinars. If you go to the Sourcebreaker website, there should be a chat icon in the bottom right. I might be telling you something that's not true, so hold on. But you should be able to just drop a note through to sourcebreaker.com. If you do that and just say, please, can you send me the webinars you've been doing over the last few weeks, someone will get them sent over to you by email. So we'll get that, get that done. Alternatively, if you, go on, Nicole.
Can I just also mention that obviously you're joining our webinar tomorrow?
Yes, I should have said that, shouldn't I?
Yeah, so it'd be great if people want to see Steve in the lights and talking about how technology can improve your sales and business performance. Then Steve's actually joining us at 11 o'clock tomorrow, and if you need any of the links, they're on our Prime page on LinkedIn.
Yes, apologies, Nicole. I can't believe that I haven't actually punted that. So sorry about that. Yeah, if you go to Prime, this is Prime. You'll find them on LinkedIn. Get yourself on there. I'm sure I'll be sharing some exceptional insights. So it'd be good to have you along to that as well.
Absolutely.
Good stuff.
Lovely.
Excellent.
Apologies for the confuse, and great to see you.
Yeah, cheers, Nicole. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.